Okay. Hold on a second. Good night, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Learning. And I hope that everyone is eager to hear this topic today because we are going to be discussing why the Barbados ratings matter. Yeah, we just going into the topic. We let Dwayne share the video in the group and all of the necessary channels so that we can make sure that we have an audience. And we give a little bit so that we can build up. So I'll let him tell me when he's ready for us to go. I hope everybody's having a good day. I really do. Hope all the Harrisonians are happy with their reunion. It's Harrison College week this week, right?
Yeah.
Here we go. Go red and gold. Oh boy. Sorry, my bad.
So we should be set now, Crystal.
Yeah, I did not plan the blue and gold to try to make up for all of the maroon and gold that I thought would have been here today, but again, happy Harrison College week. And I don't know how y'all doing in sports, but I have not been tracking. I hope you are doing well in some events, and we see how it goes.
So first thing we want to do is we want to check and make sure that we have volume, everybody can hear us good. No technical issues. How are we doing tonight so far, folks?
Seems fine, according to David anyhow. Get him some thumbs up. So
we're ready.
Looking good.
Okay.
All right. First, I would like to say thank you to Shane for coming back. I personally thought that the breakdown for the estimates was very well done because it was the first time that I actually listened to it and felt like if everything was crystal clear, it would. That was so corny. I thought that it was a way that you could be able to finally figure out what it is that goes on when they're talking about the estimates, to see where we're at, to see the position that Barbados is in. And I think that this follow-on topic is going to be very helpful in helping Barbadians to understand why the ratings matter, the actual impact that it has on our country, and hopefully we can get out of this a way to get out of the situation that we're in. Shane is also going to go into some comparisons across the Eastern Caribbean as well so that we can get an idea of where we stack up next to everyone else. And as I said, hopefully coming out of this session, people will start to think about the ways in which we can improve the situation we're in. So without further ado, I'm going to...
Just one last thing to add.
Mm-hmm.
Over the period of time, we have gone through a number of different topics, which to really, certainly I have welcomed because I have been educated on a lot of the areas that I didn't know, and especially Shane, last time you went with the estimates, I had an education on what estimates was about and what they really mean. Okay. And in the whole context of what we were trying to do through this whole series is that we want to try and go through like a whole education process. Mm-hmm. And now we've reached the crux of last week. We did the estimates you led on to here, and tonight what we're going to do is showcase really and truly what are we working with, what are we starting from, what's the base we're working with. We've tried to do the best that we could with the information that is available. Mm-hmm. A lot of the information is not let's say broken out, right, so that we can really analyze. And what we're trying to do is, in the whole process, is that we're not just about talking about problems. We want to be action and come up with solutions. Mm-hmm. And I think we've reached the stage of our series where we've talked. Mm-hmm. So tonight what we're doing is really setting the parameters for really where we're at, what we are at from an economic basis, and then there's one more presentation next week, which will be of interest to everyone, which we'll alert you to next week. But after that, we're going to take a break, and we're going to come back sometime in the first or second week of May. But what we're starting with is solutions. We're identifying the problems here now, and then we're going to come with solutions. And we've had some very, very good solutions in the group. But using your words without further ado, Shane.
Okay, thank you. All right. So I think tonight we're going to talk about Barbados' economy, the credit ratings particularly, and why credit ratings matter, particularly at this time. And I think it's always important to start off from the perspective that Barbados, like most of the other countries in the Caribbean, if not rather all of the other countries in the Caribbean, are small and they're open, and most of what we consume is actually imported. In most years, we don't actually earn as much foreign exchange from exports as we do from imports. So it means that that gap has to be filled with some sort of financing, whether it be foreign direct investment or some kind of borrowing by the government or the private sector. So there are three main sources of financing. There, like I said, there's foreign direct investment, which is typically private or public. So you can think of, for example, the investment in sandals or any other tourism project as a foreign direct investment project. There's capital market borrowing. Essentially, that's where government would go and they would issue a bond or a loan, get a loan from a foreign commercial bank to bring in foreign exchange for specific projects or for support for the foreign exchange reserves. And that kind of borrowing usually comes at a commercial rate. Yes. So in other words, you can think of it as if you go to the bank and you want to buy a car, you want to borrow for a car, the bank will assess your credit worthiness and determine what rate they will give to you. The same thing with a country. So it means that your credit worthiness, or how credit worthy you are perceived by investors, will determine how high or low interest rate you will pay.
So I can walk into the bank and I might be able to get a favorable interest rate because I'm a younger person and they see me as having a decent job, and they decide they're going to be willing to give me a rate at, say, 5%. But then Dwayne walks in and he's 80, 100 years old and he looks like if he hasn't worked 10 years in his life, and they decide that they're going to give him a higher interest rate because they consider him to be much more risky.
Right. And essentially what they've done is that they've assessed your ability to repay them.
Correct.
You have a longer lifespan, you may have a better job, so they're thinking, okay, we're more likely to get back our money, so lower risk. And then the third area of financing, which we won't really speak about a lot today, but is very important, is concessional financing. Essentially, that is money, for example, from the Caribbean Development Bank, the IMF, other agencies like that, which provide loans at a fairly cheap rate, but they do come sometimes with some conditions or are attached to particular policy initiatives.
Okay.
So, for example, the CDB might lend you money to help build the road network or for renewable energy.
Right.
Or the IMF might lend you money to help you to get out of a balance of payments problem, which is similar to what we have now,
right.
But with conditions that you fit certain things about the economy that got you in that position in the first place.
Correct.
Right?
So like that's what I call the castor oil equivalent.
Well, something like that, yes.
But to save you from emergency surgery.
Right. So because credit ratings play such a big role, the decline in our credit rating has had a substantial impact on our reserve situation. Our credit rating has gone, if we use Moody's as an example, from A3 in 2007, and that is, A3 is very, very good. Close to the top, it means you're very good credit, or you're likely to repay your debts, to CAA3, which puts us the lowest right now in the Caribbean. And that decline is actually the largest decline among pretty much all of our Caribbean neighbors in terms of from very high level to very low level. Notwithstanding, there are still other countries in the Caribbean that are not investment grade as well.
But yes,
there are Jamaica, Belize, St. Vincent and the Grenadines. But
the fall from grace has been...
It's been sharper for Barbados relative to the others. And you've seen the impact as well on the reserves and on how much Barbados has to... the rate that Barbados will have to borrow in the international market. So then, how does this translate into our economy? What has happened here? So we've all heard that the reserves have gone to 10 weeks, and you've been hearing that oil prices are lower, tourists are coming. Why is it that the reserves are still falling? Now, over the last 4 years, Barbados is actually seeing, because of the improvement in oil prices, or reduction in oil prices, and the improvement in tourism, we've actually seen that gap between imports and exports narrow to a point where in 2016, the actual receipts from exports were about what we imported.
Okay.
There are some other items, for example, dividends and other payments, that meant that there was still a net outflow of what we consider to be the current account. You can consider the current account to be, financial transactions that relate to goods and services and other transfers, which meant that was still in deficit. So you still needed to finance it with some sort of financing, foreign direct investment, borrowing. What happened, though, is because of a slowdown in foreign direct investment, and because of the government's credit rating falling over time, the government was not able to borrow on the international market in the way it would have been able to in previous years. And that meant that it had to use reserves to repay foreign debt. The Credit Suisse loan is a very good example of a loan that it pays every 6 months, and because government isn't able to go to the market and say, well, let me borrow a bit to refinance or to repay that particular maturity, it has to use the reserves it has at the central bank to repay that debt.
So basically, I should be able to use my monthly salary to cover my monthly expenses, but because that hasn't been coming in the way that I would like, I've had to dip into my savings and keep dipping until I've gotten to the point where if I dip anymore, I only will last, say, another 10 weeks based on the amount of savings that I have left.
Exactly.
And
so
if I continue on this vein,
then you will run out of savings.
That doesn't factor in the debt or interest repayments.
Right. Well, all of the debt service in general is being, most of the principal is being paid out of the reserve.
Right. So it's factored into that.
The interest payment. So you would pay some of that out of, say, for example, the exports of goods and services, things like that. But those big chunks, typically, you'd have to pay.
One of the things that you mentioned earlier, you mentioned about the import and exports. Over the period of time, somewhere in there, we've had sales of statutory corporations as well as foreign direct investments. Is that separated out of the net inflow and outflow figures?
All of the imports and the exports, yes.
Okay.
But those transactions are, so you can think of the government's or the country's transactions to the rest of the world comprising of two accounts. One account is called the current account. The other set of accounts are called the capital and financial accounts. Capital and financial accounts tend to capture transactions that relate to borrowing or repayments of debt. And foreign direct investment would be captured in there as well, because you can think of that as a debt owed to a private citizen who is invested in your country. Right.
all right, so for me, and also following up from one of the questions we received, basically, how did we get to this point? We would have had a lot longer set of reserves in the past, and we were doing well. And yes, we've had the downgrades, but it feels as though it has spiraled. And the decline that we've been experiencing, it is unprecedented. How did we get from a point? And I'm not just trying to, this is definitely not an attempt to just hit at the government, but it's just to understand how we got here and what we could do to make sure we avoid these kind of mistakes.
To be clear, to answer, this is not a political question. This is an economic question.
Yes.
We're not playing politics.
Right, of course.
Just trying to understand how we got here, because especially like the person who asked the question, they haven't been here in the country, so it almost feels as though you wake up and realize that Barbados went from being the crown prince of the Caribbean to this.
Right. So remember I said typically Barbados and most other countries will import more than they export. So there's always a gap. And unless you finance that gap, your reserves will fall. So up until about 2011, 12, we were able to finance that gap with some sales. So for example, the remaining shares of the Barbados National Bank were sold. That brought in some US dollars.
Yes.
Remember Light and Power was bought over by Emira. That brought in. So those transactions, along with other pretty robust foreign direct investment inflows, were able to finance that gap over time.
And there's only so many things you could sell.
Of course. But notwithstanding that, the gap between the imports and exports were falling. But what was falling even more was the foreign direct investment and your capacity to borrow. And your capacity to borrow was is directly related to your credit rating, which is directly related to your overall financial situation. So the level of debt the country has, the government's fiscal deficit, which is essentially the gap between its revenues and expenditures. So your domestic policy or your fiscal policy had a direct impact then on your foreign exchange reserves and your ability to borrow to meet a gap.
Okay.
I guess, I'm sorry, it's just, it really is hard to figure out how we recover from this, because trying to attract persons from overseas to come and invest into your country, it seems as though it's becoming more and more difficult. And we've even had some cases where some of the persons who came with investment opportunities were not always the most savory of characters that you'd want to get into bed with, or the concessions that you had to give, it felt as though it wiped out whatever benefit you would have received. So I'll let you continue your presentation, because I know it.
Well, we know for sure that Shane has assured us that we get into that.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's
why I said, I'll let him continue.
Because what's happening is everyone is just anxious. Everybody wants to get to the end of the race, but let us find out. Let us run the race and find out how we get there.
Right. So why all this is important, at least in the medium term, is, of course, if every year you're losing reserves, you're using your reserves to repay debt, that is permissible, or that can be allowed, to the point that the amounts that you're paying out in that debt or of the reserves are not too much.
Yeah.
So if you pay a 50 million here, a 60 million here, that might be okay for a period. In 4 years' time, though, we have the first of two large bonds maturing, and that first bond is worth about 300 million, if I'm not mistaken.
Barbados dollars.
Barbados dollars.
Right.
So the purpose there says, let's talk in US dollars.
Okay, so 150 million US dollars.
Okay.
For that one,
The 2021 bond.
2021 bond. Now that is on top of the usual debt service the
That
government
we
would have to
already
pay
have.
on other debts that they owe us. The next year, the government then has to pay an additional 200 million US on another bond. So in all, that's 350 US dollars. There is
Yeah,
million.
350 million US dollars.
Yeah, we're in some 6-digit numbers here now.
Right. Our reserves at the end of December were 681 million. So
That's
340
340
million.
Yeah.
340. They're sorry, the 329 is where they were at February, sorry. So 340 million is where they were at the end of December.
Right.
That means that if we had to repay those two bonds today out of reserves, we could not. Right? So think of it this way. The bank comes to you and says, okay, Crystal, you have $1,000 in your bank account, but you owe us $2,000. We want our money back.
And I can't go and join Natalie on the street.
Correct. Let's break it down here, because you're just talking about principles. So let's say in the 5 years, because we also have the Credit Suisse loan,
Right.
which was amortized over 5 years. About 5 years, because it 2018, we're not sure if it's 2018, 2019, because it's supposed to be 2018,
Right.
but the estimates say 2019, so somewhere along the line something happened. And then you also had this Scotiabank loan that was a drop loan that was at, like, right now is at yield at what, about 18%. So over the period of time, what we have been able to ascertain is that in the next 5 years, we have to pay out $757 million. Currently, well, at December 31st, we had 340. So we're essentially now have to pay out in the next 5 years 2.2 times what we actually have to pay out.
Correct.
So back to what your analysis was, is that, let's say, for example, your car breaks down and the repair bill is $4,000, but you have $2,000 in your bank account.
Right.
And out of that, you have your salary, whatever it is a week. Let's say $500 a week, to keep numbers simple. So you have to pay, and out of those $500 a week, you have to live. You got to go to the supermarket. You gotta buy. You know, you have a child, you got baby, you got Pampers to buy, you got milk to buy, you got imported vegetables to buy, because we don't,
Right.
So we have. So that's all foreign exchange drains.
Right.
Yeah.
but you still have to pay back this money.
Yeah, but the difference is...
So how are you going to find the money to pay for the car? To pay for the car. So essentially that's the stage we're at.
But that's the thing with the personal example you gave, the bank could come and take back up my car. What is the equivalent now with a country that's in this position?
Again, in country.
Well, I mean, in normally what a country would do is that you would say, okay, and you've seen other countries do this very recently. We owe 150 million US. We're going to go to the markets again and say, okay, we're going to borrow 150 million US, either from the same people or from different people, to repay those others. So you roll the debt, right? No.
Yes,
Herein lies the issue.
I let him get to it. The part where, they say that these ratings don't matter, we can see where it matters.
Herein lies the issue, though. Those bonds were issued at coupons, or the interest rate on those bonds at the time of issuance were about 7%.
Yes.
Now the yield on those bonds are about double that. They're about 13-14%. So it means that you would be repaying a bond worth, or with an interest rate of 7%, with a new one worth 13-14%.
At least.
If someone is willing to lend that to you.
Right? So put it in perspective, right now, excluding the Credit Suisse and the Scotiabank, because there's no figures that we can't figure out what the amortization between principal and interest on those are. So let's keep it simple. There's a 2021 bond, there's a 2022 bond, and then there's a bond further down the road of 2035, which later on I can give you all some insight and information on. But 2035. So we have those three bonds. The interest payments on those bonds are $41 million a year, approximately. If we had to replace those bonds today, the interest payments we would have to make now all of a sudden goes to $84 million a year.
Yeah.
So
because of ratings that don't matter.
In 4 years, we would have to just in interest alone, not principal, wipe out the reserves that we have now. Which, going back to the equation, is that we said mentioning about the car is that we would have to choose between paying foreign bankers for interest on principal, because assume that you can lengthen your loan. You either paying principal or you got to decide if you're buying the Pampers, if you're buying the milk for the baby, or if you're buying your vegetables or food or medicine. So it can come to a situation where unless we keep going through that gap, you got a situation where opportunity costs will come into play. You're going to have a choice of what you're going to play, unless you have something to the ability to supplement, which hopefully we're going to get to. And you're going to tell us that we're going to get there, because I'm with you, because I believe that we can get out of this.
Just before you do, someone has asked to explain the difference between interest rates and yield rates.
Right. So the interest rate, the 7% I mentioned, is what you call a coupon. So if you go to when the government initially issued the bond, let's say they issued $100, and let's say the interest rate on that was 7%, they would pay $7 every year to the bondholder for that amount. The yield is basically giving you an idea of how investors see the riskiness of that bond. So because people can buy and sell the bond's price will change. So the bond's initial price was $100. Let's say that people really didn't want the bond anymore, and lots of people sold it.
Cheap.
Right, they sold it cheap, and the price that people were selling it at was, say, $50.
Correct.
If you take the coupon, which is $7, and divide it by the 50, you're going to get an interest rate then of about 14%. So that is the yield, and that gives you an indication of how much people want to hold that bond.
To put it in perspective, let's say, for example, let's forget the 7%. Assume it's $7.
Yeah.
If you invest, if you buy a bond for $100, you're going to get $7. If all of a sudden I buy that bond from you for $50, and I'm still getting the same $7, my return is 7 on my investment of 50 versus 7 on my investment of 100. So what happened is, when you're talking about ratings don't matter, what happened the week that the bond dropped? All the bonds dropped like 10 points.
Yeah.
So in other words, I think the
This is the price of the bond.
The price of the bond.
Yes.
The price of the bond fell. The price of the 2021, I think, fell from like 93 cents or something like that down to 80 something and change. The 2022 bond went from 80 something down to 70 something, and then the 2035 fell from 70 something down to like 65, 66. What that meant effectively is that if we had the US money, the US dollar foreign exchange, let's say for example in 2035, we have to consider the bonds as the mortgage on our country. So effectively, if we had the US dollars, we could walk back into the market, and this is just a hint into where direction we're going. We could walk back into the market, assuming, forget these laws of supply and demand, and in terms of the buy and sell, you could walk back in, buy that 2035 bond for 65 cents on the dollar.
So basically, instead of me getting a mortgage for $100 and
You
paying
can now
back
buy.
I only getting 50 to work with, but I still got to pay back out the same kind of money.
No, that's not correct. If for example, you took out your mortgage for $100, and the bank walks to you next day and say, look, you can buy back the mortgage for 65 cents on the dollar. And that's effectively where we're at, because the investors have implicitly valued the 2035 bond at 65 cents on the dollar.
Right.
Effectively, the yield on that is like the 15-16% range, somewhere around there. So hopefully hopefully everybody's following. But at the end of the day, we can buy back our mortgage cheaper. So
Remember what I said at the beginning too. The credit rating affects your credit worthiness, which affects the rate that you pay. So essentially, because the credit rating has declined, it means that the rate that an investor requires to hold this bond has gone up. And that's essentially what the yield is on the bond. Right? So again, we spoke about what has driven the credit rating where it is. So essentially, a fiscal deficit that has not declined substantially, or at least it got to a really high level, and it did decline, but it's still way above where many other Caribbean countries are. Debt levels that are now very high. And I think it's useful at this point to probably look at Barbados and compare it with, say, another country in the Caribbean before the crisis and now, and to see what that country did to get where it is now, and what we have done to get where we have gotten now. So I use Barbados and Jamaica because Jamaica is always a very good example, or previously was a good example of what people said not to do. And now it has become a better example of what perhaps a country can do. So just some statistics. In 2007, Jamaica had a debt GDP ratio of about 115%. Barbados, if you add the debt the government owes, the debt the NAS holds, as well as the debt of the public sector entities, and this is data from the central bank's report, our debt was about 78. So Jamaica was about 115, ours was about 78. So we were lower than them in terms of debt. The size of our fiscal deficit was slightly smaller. So again, the gap between our revenues and expenditures was smaller than Jamaica's. Our credit rating was A3, theirs was BA2, which means that they were jumped essentially. We had 21 weeks of reserves, they had 12. So you can see that by all of these metrics, Barbados was in a better position than Jamaica. Fast forward about 10 years, 9 to 10 years, and many of those metrics, in fact all of those metrics have reversed. So Jamaica now almost has a balanced budget, meaning that its revenues pretty much matches expenditures. Our deficit is 5% of GDP or a little more, which is based on the latest estimates. Their debt increased slightly, but I'll speak to that in a bit. Is about 119% of GDP, so just a bit higher than it was then. Our debt, again, if you include what the NAS holds and what the state-owned entities owe, is just under 160% of GDP, which puts us about third or fourth in the world. Their reserves are about 22 weeks, ours are at 10. Their rating is B3, ours is CWA3, so we are below them. Now, what has caused this divergence or this change in fortunes? Essentially, just after the crisis, both countries essentially experienced the same things. Government's revenues fell and both fiscal deficits rose. Jamaica chose to go to the IMF. Barbados did not. As a result of Jamaica going to the IMF, it underwent 2 domestic debt restructurings, and that, along with some of the other policies it put in place to increase revenues and maintain expenditures, meant that it went to a balanced budget. Barbados opted not so much to cut expenditures, to rely on more tax increases, and we spoke about this last time of the estimates of the unreliability of relying on tax.
Yeah, right. They work in 1 year and then everybody adjusts.
Exactly. And that led to Barbados' deficit remaining quite high.
Yeah.
I think one thing, just because some of the folks may not have seen your presentation on estimates, because what we were able to identify going through the estimates, and it's still standing on me to post on the site of your calculations, but what it seemed to be is, I believe it's 2011, 2012, where we determined, looking at the numbers, we reached the saturation point of taxes. So the more taxes you rose, the more taxes got raised, or the more taxes got placed, the actual total revenue on taxes actually fell.
Yeah. Right.
So we reached that saturation stage where raising taxes was not the solution to the problem, because it was only exacerbating the problem, because you raise taxes this year, you collect less in total the next year. So, and I think we found that out in 2011, 2012, but the strategy was still pursued. The only year that it really worked was when the allowances were removed. I think it was 2011, speaking on a correction, when the allowances were removed, and there was a boost in the revenue that year. But then after the first year of the initial, because of how it was done,
and the VAT as well was in place,
and then the VAT was in place, so we had a surge in the revenue. But it was only that year. But then after that year, then because you took money out of the productive sector of the economy, it did not circulate. So I think we basically established that we are at the saturation point regarding raising taxes.
So because of the different decisions that Jamaica and Barbados made, you saw the differences in their credit ratings. Barbados' credit rating declined from A3, so like I said, CAA3 is now. Jamaica's fluctuated over time, but have increased over the last 2 to 3 years. And what has actually allowed Jamaica to do is to borrow internationally, to finance its budget, to boost its reserves, but also, very importantly, about 2 years ago, the government of Jamaica has signed on to Petrocaribe when it first started, and it had built up significant debts, because how Petrocaribe works is that you take the oil from Venezuela, you pay them, let's say, half up front, and the other half becomes a loan. Jamaica had essentially built up significant debts to Venezuela over time, I think it was about $3 billion. What Jamaica did is that they went to the international markets when their credit rating had started to improve, and they borrowed $1.5 billion, and they gave that money to Venezuela, and they said, okay, we're going to give you $1.5 billion for your $3 billion of debt, and Venezuela took it. So they essentially were able to reduce their debt
by half.
Particular debt by half by just going to the markets, because they had a good credit rating. I remember globally interest rates are low right now. So other countries have taken advantage of that. Bermuda did the same thing last year. They went to the markets, they borrowed to repay more expensive debt. And like I said, other countries are doing that.
You have a better chance to negotiate.
Right, exactly. Barbados cannot do that right now, because the rates it would have to pay, like we discussed, are higher than the rates it initially entered into these agreements.
It's basically, we are now at double what we had entered in. So we entered at 7, and right now, however we want to explain the yields, is that essentially if we go to the market now, there's no chance we're going to get 7. We're looking at 14, unless we go to the big bag boogeyman,
I think that's a lesson from Jamaica as well. Not saying that the IMF is the only answer. I know you didn't say that word, but I'll say it. But I think what is important in all this is that you need to have credibility.
Just be clear. The comment about the big bag was facetious, because as soon as you say those letters, IMF, all of a sudden there's a connotation of devaluation, and we know from experience with the IMF that they have taken the position that they're all their old approach with devaluations, etc., is not really feasible, and they've finally come to terms that they can't apply those methodologies to an environment where it's export oriented, not import oriented. So we can safely say that, or we assume that if we entered into a program with IMF, that devaluation will not be first thing, because first thing on their priority, because there's no benefit to Barbados having a devaluation.
Well, two things to that. Number one, when you enter into an IMF program, you get to design the package that you think is going to get you over the problem. And they have
only
to...
if you go to them.
Well, the only way they can come is if you go, actually. They can't impose yourself on themselves on you.
Well, you go to them before you need them.
Well, and in the last Article 4, which is the second point, the last Article 4 report, which is essentially the IMF does a report on each country, each member country every year. They assess the economy. They gave some recommendations. And one of them was to say, okay, the government needs to make substantial adjustments to its expenditure.
Correct.
They said that they thought that if the currency was to be devalued, that would help, but that it wasn't necessary. What was going to be more necessary, if you didn't want to touch the currency, was to make even more fiscal adjustments. So essentially they've said, you don't have to do that, but if you are not going to do that, you have to make sure you do the things on your expenditure side and collect the revenues you need to collect to ensure you reduce the deficit and to restore the economy to some sort of balance.
And the area that usually gets attacked first is the wage bill. That's where some people like to go.
When we get the solutions, we'll discuss that. But I was more thinking that you were right to jump in with Auditor General's report. But we'll say
when he mentioned the part with collection, we've beaten that to death. To death.
So we have a gentleman that comes here every year, Mr. Trotman, and he tells us everything about the Auditor General report, and zero is done. Zero. And the majority of our problems can be semi-resolved by dealing with the issues in the Auditor General report. So
because we got over $700 million that owed by
I'll keep repeating my analogy. Unless we can keep coming and raising taxes every year, do whatever we want, but unless we fix the problems in the Auditor General report, I use the analogy that, well, I prefer to say that it's like trying to bail a boat with a fishing net, because all you're doing is throwing more water in the ocean. That's all they're doing. But
So essentially, I think the key takeaway from all of this is that credit ratings do matter.
Yes.
They matter now because we're facing a situation where we have to repay these bonds and we have to find a way to improve the credit rating. And it doesn't have to go back to investment grade. Jamaica is in investment grade, but it's on an upward trajectory. And they have that credibility behind them because they've shown the world that they can make the adjustments that are required to put them in a better position.
Yeah. I think one of the comments that was made, which is something that was mentioned, is that all of this might be irrelevant because the government has insisted that we're not going to be borrowing internationally. We're going to earn our way out of this situation.
Right.
So I wanted to make sure that it was clear, not necessarily that you can't earn your way out, but that we have significantly limited our options for negotiation by ignoring the impact that ratings have.
Right.
So,
I mean, of course, ultimately you want to be able to earn your way out of anything like this, but you have to, context is everything, right? We're operating in an environment where in 2017 oil prices are likely to be higher than they were in 2016. So it means our import bill will be negatively impacted. Also, because of Brexit and the impact that's had on the British pound, it means that Britons now have lower spending power.
correct.
So even if they do come to Barbados, they will probably spend less. Right. Yeah. So you're expecting tourism to perform. Not maybe the arrivals might be fine, but the actual receipts you get might be a bit less than last year, or not substantially better. But
just to be clear, like what's happened is that the US dollar against the pound has appreciated like 30% or something of that nature.
And against the Canadian dollar as well, because the Canadian economy
are two most revenue earners.
Two of them in the US. The Canadian economy is very heavily driven by oil. So when oil prices plunged in 2014, their currency plunged. So again, you have a situation where those two markets, which as you said, those are two of our larger tourism markets, are experiencing declines in their ability or in their ability to spend on imports, and for them tourism is an import, and that will affect our foreign exchange earnings from those two markets.
But to put it in context so that folks would understand, is when the price of oil was low, we paid less foreign exchange out.
Right, for oil.
When the pound was high, there was more dollars coming in. So what's happening now is that we're going towards a trend where your expenses can be higher because the price of oil is going up, and your inflows, which is money you get from tourism, can actually be decreasing because the amount you spend is falling. So so what will happen is that you will have a collision of your inflows coming closer to your outflows.
So that gap that we mentioned between exports and imports, which was narrowing, or imports and exports, which was narrowing,
it will be,
might potentially widen a bit. So then that might exacerbate the problem unless you find a way to substantially increase other exports or substantially reduce your imports. Now, because we are so small, we have limited capacity, it's difficult to see how you can increase your exports in the short term, meaning over the next 6-12 months. So it means that what would typically be suggested is that you reduce your imports. But of course, we import food, we import cars, we import most of what we consume. So then that becomes a difficult choice to make as a government, any government to make.
So then realistically, we're looking at a situation where we are going to be in a position where we have to, because we mentioned this before, we are going to have to cut back on certain imports that Bajans have typically enjoyed, and we're going to have to adjust the way that we look at
there's many
consumption.
Things. There's many things that we have to look at, and there's many things that have to address.
And this is happening sooner rather than later.
So the essence of today really is to, since we had a furor this week on painting, pictures, and murals, I think this one is the one that really everyone should be concerned about, because what Shane tonight is we're all painting tonight is what the reality is we're at. Now, we were talking about the FX side, but we haven't even talked about on the local side. So on the local side, from my understanding, between debt and interest payments, is that we have about 890, we're talking Barbados dollars now. So in this year, we have 898 million repayment. The following year, we have over $1 billion, just slightly over $1 billion. So in the next 2 years, we have to look for $2 billion. Now, to put this in perspective,
and these are bonds. These don't relate to treasury bills and loans and some of the other debt.
Right. So these are only one component of the whole scenario. So to put it in perspective is that we heard the whole adage of the government has no money, and we see it in the transitory inconveniences, otherwise known as potholes. We see it in all the aspects of our whole infrastructure. So the context is that if you don't have money and people are waiting for their refunds and people are waiting for payments from government. So if you have it in that context, that all these things you hear of in the economy. So the question is how are you repaying those? Because over the next 5 years, on the local side now, we have, I think, in the context, about $4 billion to repay Barbados dollars on the local side in the next 5 years. So we have elections coming up, but this is going to transcend whatever election period that we have. So whether it's the same party that's in power or one of the 5 or 7 other parties, someone is inheriting this. And it's how do we can't pay our bills now. We can't physically pay our operating bills right now. How are we paying our other bills? Because you would have to hire additional printers, and they'll have to work triple time to be able to print $800 million, and you simply just can't do that.
And then also go in a little bit more as to what is going to happen to Barbados if we continue on the path we're on in printing money.
Well, printing money, the printing is done because you're trying to maintain a certain level of expenditure given a certain level of revenues. That level of, remember, when government spends money, it spends money on 4 main areas. Wages and salaries, so money going into people's pockets. goods and services. So, which is if government pays a contractor to do something for it, which is again money going into people's pockets. Interest payments, which is money primarily going to national insurance for bonds that they owe, and of course foreign bond holders, etc. And transfers and subsidies, so money that is transferred to the QEH, the university, the transport board, and much of that is used to pay wages and salaries.
Mm-hmm.
So most of the government's money goes into people's pockets.
Yes.
People use that money to import,
Yep.
right? So the more money you give people, especially if they have a demand for these things, the more they will tend to spend, and the more you will use foreign exchange. And then the foreign exchange reserves will then continue to fall.
Yeah.
So essentially that is how the printing works. You're financing an activity that essentially is a drain on the foreign exchange reserves.
Does not sound like good news at all.
Well,
Picture. Well,
I think the situation is not the best.
so let's get straight to the needed matter. Is that I say within this year we have to go to some structured program. I can't see us going beyond a year. We can't keep kicking the can down the road. Only puts a plaster on the sore. We have to address it. My takeaway from the central bank, presentation with the Dr. Honahan, yes, I think he was absolutely correct. If you go to a bank, if you personally go to a bank, when you don't need money, you have a better chance of negotiating and more leverage
Yes.
than when you're on a string and need it desperately.
Yeah.
Certainly my experience. He has indicated that what you do is you go with a homegrown solution, but it has to be a plan. You have to go with achievable objectives, you have to go with sustainable objectives, and you have to go things that make sense. My understanding is this is one of the myths and misnomers of the IMF program. IMF doesn't want to solve the problem for you. They want you to come with the solution, and they need to make sure that it's workable within the environment that they want to lend at. Now, you would have to tell me on the IMF side, like what interest rate. My understanding is that they're like 1 or 2% over.
Yeah,
so it's
1 or 2% period. That is usually very cheap.
Very cheap, very very cheap financing, because we physically cannot keep going after these 18% loans from Scotiabank and TNT. We can't go after these artificial injections from Credit Suisse at whatever rate, because I think the Credit Suisse rate was tied to ratings.
Yeah.
So the lower we fell, the higher interest we had to pay. So right now the Credit Suisse is at what, 11%?
It's around 11% now.
So we're now at 11%. So if we were to go to the IMF program now, what would be roughly the interest rate? You have any idea of what we would pay?
I mean, I don't know exactly what it would be, but it would, like I said, remember when I started off, I said the different sources of financing. Concessional financing is very cheap. So, for example, some of the debt that we have owed to the IADB, the Inter-American Development Bank, and the Caribbean Development Bank, those loans right now are about 2-3%. So you could envisage a situation where the government, if it chose, went to the IMF or the Caribbean Development Bank or one of these agencies with a policy program or framework and said, okay, we want to borrow some money and we're going to put these things in place, and then they use that foreign exchange to help to repay the more expensive debt. So that is a potential.
So effectively, you could, let's use the word insider trading now. That term was given to me early in the week. So we could go knowing that we have to go to one of these lending agencies, go to one of the lending agencies and say, all those loans that we want out there, we want to buy back those loans using your cheap money to buy back those loans to start with, and that reduces our debt servicing requirements. But you going with insider information that you're going to the market and say, we're buying back that loan, but you know that you're going to the IMF to buy it back, theoretically. And the savings that you will have is you bought back the mortgage at haven't worked it out. but I know if you were...
Well, you have the thing about it though. You would still have to repay them the principal that you initially had.
Even if you buy them back at the market?
If you are the government of Barbados, yes, you would have to. If you're the average person, you wanted to invest in it, you could pay $50 for it, on the $50 out of the 100. But if you're the government of Barbados, essentially you want to give people back their money. In the Venezuela case, remember Venezuela is also an oil-based economy, so they are going through quite a bit of challenges as well. So they were happy to take 50 cents of every dollar that they had lent to Jamaica. A large bondholder that is maybe a pension fund or a hedge fund that is trying to make a large return for their investors might not be so keen on that, because that would be actually considered, that might be considered a default, which you of course want to avoid at all costs.
But so like say for example on the 2035 bond, so if I'm a pension holder and if I'm a pension fund and I have US dollars available, and from a Barbadian perspective, you know that at some point in time they have to go to a structured program. You could effectively buy the 2035 bond, write it for 18 years, we have 2070, write it for 18 years and get your 15 or 16% return.
Just to bring it back, because if we're making it seem as though the IMF program is an obvious solution, and I'm not saying it is not a solution, but I want to try to understand why the government is so hesitant in terms of going to the IMF, and because they know these solutions as well too. And there is a reason that they would be hesitant, and I'm trying to make sure we bring a balanced perspective as to why the IMF would have its advantages and where the disadvantages would lie in terms of turning to a program like that.
Well, I think, I mean, I'm not a politician nor am I in their head, so it was difficult to answer that.
We thank you for that.
Okay. But I think that, of course, even though you develop a program and you might take it to the IMF still has to agree that that is what is going to work, and that the pace of that is going to work. So, for example, there might be certain things the IMF might say. They might say, well, you know what, these large transfers that you give to all of these state-owned entities, you're going to have to cut those.
Right.
The government might decide, well, we have a philosophical view that we should maintain our expenditure on healthcare, on education, et cetera, and we're not willing to do that.
Yes.
So that might be a reason. There might be things that the government might want to do.
And with an election year coming up, some of those conditions may not be so favorable in terms of being able to secure yourself a position. Right.
So I think the government or any government would know that it wants to get to a situation where it can balance its budget, it can improve its credit rating. I think sometimes the way that you get there might be the obstacle in doing certain things.
So I think that, you know, we kind of know where the stage we're at. We just want, you know, we're trying to work out how do we get there, because as you said, the IMF, they're going to want you to cut certain programs, and one of the things obviously is going to be wages. Wages is one of the fundamental bills. That's a business side of the situation. You have the social side, and you have to weigh all these decisions very carefully, because there's a social impact side to it.
There's always a social impact.
So the social impact side to that is, for one, you have some very I know that the civil service gets a whole wash down, but it's not entirely. My experience coming from an audit side, it's not always entirely their fault. The process and everything behind it, when I go, I try to walk through what the process is, and we need a revamp of the social services. In the civil service sector, we've been saying it for years. I've been to a presentation 5 years ago at the ICAB, and the past director of the public sector service reform, he said we'll be talking about in 10 or 15 years. The problem is at some point in time, the politicians have to stop being politicians and belly the cat. You have to do it on a manageable basis. By the end of the day, you have a social side to this. You can't just cut wages. If you cut wages, you're taking food off the table of families. You have to face that reality. And it could be your neighbor, it could be your family, it could be your friend, people you see and meet. You just can't do that in an arbitrary scissor cut basis. You have to do it in a managed approach. Yeah. You also have to look at the fact that once you take salaries out of the economic cycle, you're also taking spending out of the economic cycle. Now, that impacts the local economy because there's no cycle of here. On the flip side, it helps the FX side. So what I like to look at is that you draw a line between the FX and the local side and look at individual problems between the FX, solve those, and solve the one on the local side, knowing that if you solve the one on the local side, you're going to help to solve the one on the foreign exchange side. So from my perspective is that before we get to the social scissor cutting, let us look at other measures that we can do. But the point being is that we have to do something urgent. We can't come in March and ask people, what is your suggestion? We should be coming in March, and you have people who are paid to do this job. You can't be asking ICAB, you can't be asking
volunteer associations,
what is your solution? They can have input, but you can't have people who are doing other jobs to do the jobs of people who are paid for this. Because what you've implicitly said is that you have no confidence in what in that department, which I doubt, because I think there are competent people that work within the government sector. So for me, you have to look at the different angles, and we have to say, all right, let us go through segment by segment. We have to look at we have to refinance. We have to look at restructuring. You gave the example of the Jamaica experience, and rather than myself and Crystal, I'm going to put you straight on the spot. What is your suggestion in terms of refinancing?
So, I'm going to stay on the fence. I'm not going to say you should or should not do it, but what I will say is this. The debt is a symptom of a bigger issue, right? Governments don't just borrow because they want to borrow. No one borrows because they want to borrow. They borrow because there's a gap between revenues and expenditures. You want to pay for something, and you don't have the income to pay for it, so you borrow. So, restructuring the debt, or refinancing the debt, however you want to term it, will help to solve the symptom. It's like taking a napkin and wiping your nose when your nose is running. But it's not fixing the cold, which is that you're spending more than you're earning. And for a long time, last year was a bit of a change, but for a long time, even if you take away government's interest costs, it was actually spending more on those other three items, the wages, the goods, and the transfers, than it was earning.
Correct.
Even if you take away the interest costs, which meant that if you restructured all the debt and paid 0% on it, you still had a gap.
Yes.
Like I said, that has changed somewhat last year because of the amnesty and some additional taxes and other things. But my suggestion would be that whatever is done, you need to fix those structural problems first that have caused you to get in that position in the first place. Any restructuring or refinancing or anything like that, those things have to be after the fact, or those things have to come after you fix those problems, and then you said, okay, this problem is still a bit large because we have this large debt. But if you do that without doing the rest, then you just get yourself back there. That's like kicking the can down the road as well.
Well, I would agree with you very much on that, because there are things that we do that we can do differently here, which we'll get into the solution problems. Like we import vegetables, and we have a lot of land lying idle. I'm hoping that some folks in the agricultural sector will be able to come forward and be able to, we're hoping as part of these solutions, and they'll have these wonderful ideas that we can act and show us how we can save money, because if we're not sending money overseas to some other grower somewhere else, we're having it here. But also too, you have another aspect to that, is that you're providing employment here.
Right.
So you now can take the high level of youth unemployment, hopefully turn them into farmers. And I know there's a lot of interesting programs.
That goes down a very long path, because one of the biggest things that has never been addressed properly is the issue of larceny in Barbados. When people invest in farming and invest in agriculture, and then someone comes and reaps all of the benefits, and very little is done to compensate a farmer for that inconvenience.
And I personally am looking forward to that discussion on the farming, because we're going to be starting going into, because we're going to be looking at solutions more in depth, because it's going to be very difficult to cover a lot of them tonight.
Correct.
And certainly you have to look at areas like that. You have the areas with the oil. We did a debt presentation on hedging. When it was at $30 and $40
a barrel,
there was good reason, because then at least we know from a manageable level, at least for the next 2 years, what our payments are going to be. Right now we are at the mercy of the markets, and we don't have the ability to be flexible or adjust. The problem with it is that me, you, Crystal, and everyone else out there, we're what you call the unhedged naked side of that transaction, because all that happens is Barbados goes to the market, buys whatever is the price is, puts a markup on that, and Crystal, Shane, and me, and everyone else there pays it. Now, if the market is $70 a barrel, me and all of us pay. But if we hedged at $40 a barrel when it was down there, we know for sure that when we turn on our light bill is going to be virtually the same for the next 2 years. Whatever the hedge principle is. When we go to the pump, with the exception of the government manipulating in terms of the hidden taxes within there, we know what the pump is going to be. We don't have to worry and sit and figure out what the world oil price is unless we are producing oil.
I'm just going to let Shane, I'm not sure how much you have left in your presentation, but...
Well, I'm interested if there are any additional questions in the chat or...
I think what we're doing now is we really just discussing solutions. So the floor is basically open for everyone that's watching and listening. Is that, if you have any suggestions with solutions, or if you have any other queries, now is a very good time to ask Shane, because I certainly have enjoyed this presentation so far, and I'm really not sure I wanted to end right away. So if you have any queries, certainly now would be a good time to ask Shane. And don't be afraid to ask anything if you want us to go back through over the yield or anything of that nature. But certainly on the solution side, we are looking for, we can discuss some from our end, but we're looking for solutions from everyone.
Yeah, I think one of the, so you mentioned the social impact and trying to limit the loss of employment and things like that. I think, I know privatization is a bad word, but there are services that the government offers that the private sector can provide as well. In some cases at a higher price, of course, but in some cases not at a substantially higher price. I always marvel at, and I don't own a minibus, but I always marvel at the minibuses because there are buses that have been on the road since I was at school. Now the fact that they're still on the road and they're still having to earn just $2 on every person that comes and uses the transportation means that they must be at least breaking even or making some profit. Is there a way that we can design a system where the private sector takes on more of the bus service? With some regulation, of course, because you don't want someone deciding, well, I don't want to go in St. Andrew today,
I was just going to bring up that point, because a lot of the argument for why the private sector does so well in transportation areas because they take up the favorable routes. And then government then is left to hold the bag with the less profitable routes, which is why the transportation area is something that's always a ticklish topic, because if you completely privatize it, how then you control the fact that this private organization might decide they're not going to send as many buses, if any at all, to areas that are critical, because if you don't have a transportation system in these areas, how do these people get to work?
So I think that's where regulation comes in. You give someone a license and say, okay, you can operate this route. The license, the price of the license might be determined on how profitable the route is. So if you're going to an area in St. Andrew that might not be as profitable as, say, going to an area in St. Michael that's really profitable, you pay a little less for that license to compensate for that potential loss in income. But then there are certain requirements you have to meet. And if you don't meet them, then the license could potentially be taken away and given to another private transportation provider. So I think, taking things out of government,
it's not always a bad thing.
Yeah, and of course, people still have to drive the buses. So there's still going to be some level of employment that has to be maintained. It might not be as much as when the government did it, because maybe their efficiencies at the private sector can capitalize on that the public sector might not, because of the need to maintain employment and stuff like that. But over time, if government has a lower expenditure bill, it means it can then spend money on some of the areas it needs to spend money on, which is infrastructure, things like that.
Education.
Exactly.
And focus on those specific areas that are key to a vibrant and energetic economy.
Because remember, just before you go on, remember the consequence of the debt is that the debt comes with interest.
Yes.
So the more interest you're paying off your revenue, the less money you have to spend on those things anyway.
Correct.
So you have to make a decision.
Yourself in the foot.
Right. So it's either you make a decision to do it today or you do it tomorrow. But at some point in time, you're going to have to give up spending on things that are essential because you have a debt burden that is just too high.
My belief, my approach is that it's going to be very difficult. Face reality. We're around the corner election. There's no chance that's going to happen because as a society, I don't think we're mature enough as voters to understand what it requires to do the right thing.
We get there, hopefully.
Hopefully through these programs we're going to get there. Yeah. But if something that might be for the better good of all may require a cut somewhere from me or you or Crystal, the mature voter would understand that. I think Mr. Monahan, Professor Monahan, he said it best in his lecture, because someone asked him when they went through that restructuring program in Ireland, how many people lost their seat. They said all except the Minister of Finance, because they all understood what he had to do to get it right. But they made the others pay the price for that. So they took it on. So you have to understand from a politician's perspective the reality of where we are. Yeah. So we have to go from there. So to sit here and say that we got to cut, and I already addressed the social side of things, to say that we have to cut. My belief is that the best attack is the best way forward is a good offense. And we started off a lot of our programs. We had a very good, interesting discussion with Gregory McConney and Don Valinis on the international business side. And Donville and Gregory, you all need to come back because we need to put you all back on the solution side of things now, because we need those sectors to be drivers. Yep. We need the agricultural sector to drive, and we have this thing called tourism. There's niches that we have to drive in sports tourism, and there's sports tourism, there's all the other, food and festival tourism. But the key that we have to understand is that we haven't sandals is a whole different scenario, but we can't give out some concessions, and then we need to know what the net driver is in. And then one of the main things that we have to look at from our FX side is that we need to look at what we call the leakages. There's many aspects of the leakages. You have situations where people can have purchasing companies overseas, and you're doing a project, especially on the construction side, you're doing a project, and the project is duty free. You can put any price you want on the goods, and that shifts foreign exchange outside, because once the goods come in, you got to pay the foreign exchange, it goes out. So if you're purchasing a company, it goes to that. So like someone made a suggestion the other day that said, we are so concerned about under invoicing. So if somebody imports a car, they go to a blue book, and the blue book says that this is a Toyota, whatever kind of car. You're saying that's 20,000. We go to the blue book, is 30. They're saying that on other materials you need to go to the blue book. So if the blue book says it's $30,000 for these pipes, and you showing $60,000, something should be asked as why the additional 30,000, because what that means is instead of sending 30,000 of foreign exchange out to a purchasing company, which may actually be the same company for the construction company, they're now sending 60,000 out. So that's 30 additional thousand of our foreign exchange going that way. Not only that, it's our earnings, because the earnings have now moved from Barbados to somewhere else, because it's now become an expense in Barbados, so they're not paying taxes on it here. So we have to look at the leakages, we have to plug those leakages, we have to look at the management companies that are set up in between all these things, and we have to look at the St. Lucia side of things, because there's a lot of companies that have things. So we have a international business sector here doing similar to what other companies here are doing with other jurisdictions. So we now have to do what the Americans and the other are trying to do, which is trying to minimize the impact, but in reverse. So we need to look and see how we can plug these leakages. We also need to see and look at the additional sectors where instead of
relying on traditional sectors, we start exploring the options that we have that can boost us. So like entertainment and renewable energy.
Entertainment is one.
Entertainment is a huge area that we can get involved with.
App builders, the whole the Silicon Barbados scenario. You know, how can we help develop those? But we need to have positive policies going forward.
Yes.
And in terms of attracting business, and we have to make Barbados the place to do business. And I believe that if you make Barbados the place to do business, cut out the layers of red tape, all the bureaucracy.
The ease of doing business is a whole other topic altogether.
But we have to, so in our solution program, these have the integral parts of the solution. We have to go through segment by segment. But it's not only a matter of just coming up with solutions and putting them on the pile of all the other good solutions that have been there for the last 50 years. It is to get all of what I call the silence of the lamb organizations in place, which is they're not so much silent anymore, the Barbados private sector, the small businesses started that way. Certainly not BIBA. I will have to say that Gregory McConney has been a tremendous change to that organization. But all the other professional bodies, the CFA, the ICAP, the BMA, everyone has to come on board. The unions and all 30 managers of our money, all 30 parliamentarians, we have to come on board. We have to understand that there's a problem that transcends whatever that voting day is. There's a problem that transcends there, and we have to come up with a common ground solution to solve these problems on a realistic basis going forward. And everyone has to be on board to say, this is what we're going to do. Us sitting here, we don't have the power to do it. We need those people that I just mentioned, I call them the silent Islamic organizations. They got to stop being silent. They have to stop taking the nose out the trough, the BHJ, everybody, all these organizations. I mentioned BHJ because I left them out. But we have to get all these organizations to work together to say we have to stop this fight. We got to work together to do it.
Yeah. Well, I would definitely like to thank Shane for coming again. I'm very grateful because I think that your perspective is very insightful. It's great to have a younger person who has this level of knowledge and is able to translate it in a way that I'm hoping that our viewers can appreciate. It seems as though they appreciate it and that they understand it. Okay. And as I said, he's a young and upcoming economist. He actually gave us some of his time, so I'm always appreciative, especially during Harrison College Week.
Well, I just want to add, there's two fundamental things that were left out here.
Okay.
That were left out here is absolutely, definitely two things: the renewable energy, as well as looking at electric cars. That has to be front and center with our quotes, because oil is one of our biggest component bills of that whole thing. We need to look at the renewable energy sector. And to the gentleman, Mr. Henry III, Otis Henry III, if you listen to any of our programs, the central focus of everything that we have said is that for these programs to work, the principles of government is critical. Governance is critical to this whole program. The adherence to the principles of governance is absolutely critical. And what we need is, what we said in our governance program is that what was said by the Prime Minister in the DLP manifesto of 2013, as well as the 2008 manifesto by this current administration, we agree. That's what we need to do. There's also an initiative by another grouping, I think it's called the Nation Action Group or something of that nature. They have mentioned other additional. We also need the freedom of information and the integrity legislation. I didn't do my calculation, but I know it's like 9 years, so many days that. And
Yeah, but the Honourable Minister has said that they did not think that is something they were
That
going to
is
continue to
right.
push forward. So.
But he's one. We have 285,000 people. For me,
Yes.
change in governance is more important than change in government, because change in government doesn't necessarily mean change in governance. For me, the overriding principle from an economic perspective, not a political perspective, is that we need to change of governance. We need to go to something along the lines of Transparency International. There are many lending agencies and bodies across the international bodies across the world that fund and assist in governance and the implementation of governments across the board. I think St. Lucia just went through a whole governance training program. Guyana, I know, has entered into with an organization called Transparency International, and from what I can see and hear from the Guyanese perspective, it's working. So, Mr. Henry, what you said, very valid point, but it's always worth repeating, but we are very, very much an advocate of governance.
Yes. So, any last comments that you would like to make?
Well, I don't want people to feel all like it's all doom and gloom. I think that the reason why I gave the Barbados Jamaica example is just to show that there's always a way out. You had Barbados starting at a better position than Jamaica in 2007, and Jamaica's been able to improve on a number of its indicators, including the ease of doing business. They're actually one of the best, if not the best, in the Caribbean right now.
Okay.
So there's always there is a way out. So I think that we need to make some tough decisions, but those decisions are not impossible.
And someone on the thread also mentioned Jeremy's favorite topic, using the Singapore model.
Well, yeah, there are lots of examples we can use.
And Mr. McConney has now confirmed that we will see Mr. McConney in the solutions section in mid-May. Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll talk with Donville as well. I just want to say that Shane, this is the second time we've had it with you. It's been a pleasure. You've taught me on estimates, and you've certainly taught me on in terms
ratings.
in terms of ratings and reserves. And I think it's a tremendous attribute that you've come forward and shared of your time with us. And one of the things that we try to put forward in this group is that it's not just about myself, Crystal, Jeremy, David, or Colin. This is about all of us. This is a solution for all of us in Barbados. And there are many people out there who have things that myself and Crystal don't even know about. We're talking about, if you go in the group, they're talking about producing this app.
Right.
What a brilliant idea. You know, I mean, it's just phenomenal. And what we want to try and do is that anyone out there who can have, because we're now in the solutions section. So what we're interested in now is solutions. So if you have a solution, please share it with the group, not just with myself and Crystal or Colin or Jeremy or David. Please share it. And we welcome people like Shane and whoever else can come forward. And as I said, there's one more session in program, then we're breaking till mid-May. And we have some interesting things coming up for you folks in a little, hopefully next week or so. But certainly we're in solutions section now. We're never into politics. We're always into economics. So we welcome the solution side of things, and I thoroughly enjoyed this evening. I hope you all did, because it was quite educational for me.
Good.
And I was very happy to hear from you, Shane. Thank you.
Thanks for having me again.
Thanks, everyone, and have a great night.